Hello and welcome to the Oxford Clay Pottery Podcast. I'm Catherine Tomlinson and I founded Oxford Clay, an eco-conscious pottery company. So on this podcast, we're going to be talking about all things pottery related, often with an eco-conscious twist, and I can't wait to share it with you. Let's go. Hello and welcome back to the Oxford Clay Pottery Podcast. I'm Catherine and today I wanted to talk to you about the 6 different stages of clay. Clay is incredible and it has completely different properties at each stage. And so I wanted just to talk you through like each of the stages, like what they're mainly used for and kind of like the special properties of each stage, because clay is just amazing. And a lot of the fun of like pottery is just kind of like learning about like what clay can do at each stage, and what it can't do. So let's begin. We'll begin at the very kind of most watery stage of clay, and that is slip. So slip is when you've got lots of water added to clay, and it can be runny, or it can be a kind of sticky, or it could flow, like in the case of like slip casting and stuff. So basically at this stage, color can be added to slip, and like stains and metal oxides, and it can be used for slip trailing, which is when you see pottery which has a kind of raised design, and that's done with slip trailing, which is like a kind of pipette full of coloured clay, and then it's like squeezed on the pottery, and then it's like so that's usually at the leather hard stage, which is another stage which we'll talk about in a minute. Slip is also really fantastic for joining bits of clay together. So you might have heard of this kind of score technique, where basically if you want to join 2 bits of clay together, you score it, you add a bit of slip, and then you kind of like join squish it together, and the slip helps the clay to kind of join together. So you usually do that again at the leather hard stage, but you use slip. And then another another method of using slip is slip casting, and that is when a chemical called a deflocculant is added to sticky wet clay, and it turns into this like incredible kind of runny substance that you can then pour into a plaster mold. And then after a certain amount of time, the water gets sucked out after a certain amount of time, say 45 minutes, or it can be very short for like a porcelain slip casting, it can be like 10 minutes. You pour it out again, and then you're left with this clay piece which has been slip cast. So those are the 3 ways in which slip is normally used in pottery. And then if we think about the next stage of clay, so that's, I'm just going to call this like wet clay. And this is basically, the clay that you would use for like modeling, for like hand building, sculpting, throwing pots on the wheel. That is like the wet clay stage. So it's plastic at this stage. You can do all sorts of things with it. You can roll it out, you can push it into a plaster mold, you can, like I said, make pots on the wheel, build all sorts of things, and that is the wet clay stage. So following on from that, with a little bit more water removed, is the leather hard stage of clay. And I have to say, I think leather hard is like my most favourite stage of clay, because it's not as kind of easy to kind of break your pot as it was at the stage before or at the stage after, because the stage after pots are actually very breakable too. So it's a very strong stage. You can still do loads to the clay. So if you're, say, like you've made a pot on the wheel and you want to like turn the base, you do that at the leather hard stage. I really love this stage of clay. Like pots are very robust and you can kind of do lots to them. You can can attach handles, you can, kind of scratch things, etch things into them. You can again paint them with slip, So yeah, fantastic stage of clay. But when you want to fire clay, so the next stage, you need to actually dry it first. So the next stage of clay is the dry stage. So some people call this like the bone dry stage as well. And it's also known as greenware. So when you hear people refer to things as greenware, they might have like a greenware sign up, so like on a shelf or something in a pottery that you might be going to or something. That is when clay is basically dry and it's ready to get fired. Okay, so that brings us on to the. Actually, just before we move on, I just want to say to you that things at the greenware stage are extremely brittle. So it can be quite a tricky stage because say like if you knock something, say if you're taking it off a shelf and you knock it, it can actually like break your pot. You can get cracks in your pot appearing. So it can be quite a tricky stage, the greenware stage. So now we covered that. The next stage is the bisqueware stage. Okay, so that is when clay is fired to around kind of 900 degrees in the case of stoneware pottery. It's a bit lower in the case of earthenware pottery. And the reason that potters fire their clay to bisque temperatures is that it becomes very strong. So the water molecules in the clay actually get released, and so clay now has become it's a different chemical structure. So it means that it will never now be able to turn back into wet clay. So every stage up until this stage, clay has been able to like turn back into like wet clay. If you just add some water, you can reclaim it and you can get it back to that original stage. But once it's been bisque fired, its chemical structure's changed and it's now hard, but it's still porous. So at this stage, this is when potters would generally apply a glaze to pottery. And bisque fired pottery is fantastic because you dip it in the glaze, and because it's very porous, it will absorb all the water and you'll get like a lovely kind of even layer of glaze on your pot. That's the bisque stage, and then the next stage is the glaze firing stage. Okay, when a pot goes into the glaze firing stage, obviously the bottom has to be clean and stuff, so it might have glaze on, and then again, so it's heated to even higher temperatures. So this could be in an example of stoneware, it could be like 1280. In the case of porcelain, it could be 1390, or in the case of earthenware, it could be 1000. So when clay is heated to those temperatures, it becomes what's known as like sintered, where the clay molecules will actually fuse together and the clay becomes vitrified, where basically it becomes impermeable to water going through it. So again, its chemical structure is changed again and it becomes impermeable to water, and it's known as the clay reaches maturity. Basically, it's fired to such a high temperature that it's considered mature, and if it's fired beyond that, then it can actually start melting. So that's why like earthenware clays, say like for example like a terracotta that's got quite a lot of iron in it, iron sort of acts as a flux, which means it can kind of like cause the clay to start melting. So if you fire like a terracotta up to like stoneware temperatures, it can sort of start to melt. So that's what the different temperatures of clay, the different types of clay, that's what it means. Basically, they fire to like different temperatures in terms of reaching their maturity. Okay, so I hope you've enjoyed those the 6 different stages of clay. We'll just go through them again briefly. So we've got the slip, which is kind of like runny clay. Basically, you can use it for sticking things together. You can use it for slip casting, kind of like doing slip trailing. It's brilliant. And then you've got like wet clay, which is just kind of like, the normal bog standard clay that you get, from potters merchants. Usually comes in bags of 12.5 kilograms. So you get different types of it, but you would mold your piece like sculpture or hand built thing, or pot on the wheel. You'd mold it out of that clay at that stage. And then the next stage is leather hard, and that's when it's still wet. You'd know it was leather hard because it's still kind of like dark in color. And you can still, do things to it, like scratch things into it. It's still soft enough to have, things cut into it, but it's not so soft that it will kind of like squish and lose its shape like the stage before. The next stage is dry clay, also known as greenware. And clay is extremely brittle at this stage, so just like, be careful you don't like knock your pot, which I've done like 1,000 times, and like break it. And that's the stage when they're all like loaded into the kiln, and then they're bisque fired. That's the next stage. And bisque fired clay is very porous, but it's very hard. So, it can be glazed without it disintegrating. It's changed its chemical structure. It's not going to go back to like, disintegrating into like, clay, like all the other stages before. And then the final stage is the glaze firing stage. And this is when clay's reached maturity. It's been fired to a high enough temperature as to become impermeable to water. Yeah, so I hope you've enjoyed that episode. I've really enjoyed like talking to you about the different stages of clay. I love clay. I love like all the different stages and how it like, it's different at each one. It's such an incredible substance, and how it can be, really brittle at one stage and really strong at another stage, and kind of flow at one stage and be like totally, solid at another stage. It's just incredible. So yeah, I'm really looking forward to seeing you on the next episode, and until then, very happy potting.